Advocate podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chikumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lizette and Stephen.
Hey everyone, Lizette here, she, her, Aya. The mission of the Parent Advocate podcast is to elevate conversation and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lizette, we have a really special guest on today. I'm so excited.
Stephen, that's right. We have Sonia Murphy joining us today, and I cannot wait to talk to her.
Me either, so let's stop beating around the bush and get to the show. Welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate podcast. Let's get started.
Let's do this.
Lizette, this week has literally flown by. I can't even keep up with all the things that have been happening, so bring me up to speed. What's been going on with you?
First of all, we have to get our listeners hyped up for the Gender Liberation March that is happening September 14th in Washington, D.C. If you haven't followed them on Instagram, do so now. Follow Raquel Willis, do all the things, and let's march for trans liberation and reproductive freedom on September 14th.
We said, you didn't tell them that we're both going to be there.
Well, I forgot. But I'm excited to see you.
It's been a minute. So I think the last time we saw each other was like LA.
Yeah, last year.
Yes. So this is going to be a reunion. It's a reunion. Anyway.
We're gonna do this.
Continue with your updates, please.
Okay. It's been a Kamala Harris in Arizona month. So we have had more events out for Kamala Harris, and it's very exciting. I want to meet my sorority sister, Dolores Cuerta. I am 1 degree of separation from her from 6 different ways. She came down to Phoenix and people met her. And I was like, why do I miss this opportunity every single time? She came out to a Kamala Harris event. I missed it. I didn't get to meet her. I didn't even know if I wasn't even invited. She's like a hero to me. So one day, hopefully. Yesterday, we celebrated Daniel's birthday. That was super exciting. Even when I tell you, this was the very first birthday party ever where we've invited my dad's family, my mom's family, Jose's family, and our chosen family. And so I was stressed for a whole 3 weeks around how this was going to go down, but it was really beautiful. And Daniel smiled the whole time, and we had mariachi and we had food. We ran out of food, and it was just beautiful to see like everyone together and celebrating my most favorite person, Daniel. So that was fun. And I don't know, it's just felt like a blur. So tell me about you.
All right. So as you know, last week, Hobbs had top surgery, and this week was the follow-up appointment. His bandages came off, his stitches, well, the sutures came out, and he's looking great. And I got a great picture of him like flexing because he's been working out for like 2 years now. And so he looks really good. I'm so happy for him. He is the person that he wants to be. I just can't wait for him to be totally healed so he can just walk around like the rest of the bare-chested Africans in this house who walk around topless. So that was the first thing. This Tuesday, I will be in Philadelphia to meet Madam Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate for the 2024 presidential race. I'm so excited. I'm so excited because I think her announcement of her running mate is going to be tomorrow. And this will be the first setting where the public will get to meet this candidate.
Honestly, I'm rooting for Mark Kelly.
So Mark Kelly, the governor of Minnesota, Bashir, like those are like the top 3. I feel like Mark Kelly is probably got it in the bag. I'm just concerned about what happens if we give up that seat or if that seat goes to a Republican and that balance in the Senate goes away. That's my feeling.
I know, but he's got it.
We shall see. Anywho, and I just finalized my trip to Chicago for the DNC when the Democratic Party will formally nominate their candidate for president. And so Nicole and I, we have been kikiing about this trip. We've got little dates in the calendar, people we're going to meet, places we're going to go. We're getting our outfits, all of our Kamala gear. We are ready to throw down in Chi-Town.
I love it. We got Kamala t-shirts from the Glue Factory down here, and we're super amped about it.
I've been wearing like a different Kamala shirt like every day. I'll probably have like 40 by the time this election is over, but I want people to know. I want people to know that our girl is finna be president. out this bitch.
That's right.
But Lisette, we could talk about Kamala 2024 all day long, but let's get to today's topic, shall we?
Let's do it.
A Trump-appointed judge in Alabama broke ranks and refused to block the Biden administration's Title IX sex discrimination rule. Judge Anna Marie Axon, a Trump appointee, became the first district judge to deny a request for an injunction over the rule, which includes LGBTQ protections. In rejecting the arguments advanced by Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, as well as the Independent Women's Law Center, Independent Women's Network, Parents Defending Education, and Speech First Inc., Judge Axon wrote, "The evidentiary record is sparse and the legal arguments are conclusory and underdeveloped. This ruling comes as the U.S. Supreme Court is considering the Justice Department's request to partially stay injunctions issued in 2 other cases."
Can we just say that trans people are protected under the law? It doesn't matter how many lawsuits they bring, trans kids win every single time. And so, done. I'm glad. This makes me happy. All right, on to other news. A federal court upheld an Ohio school district's ban on anti-trans bullying, defending its trans-inclusive anti-bullying policy for the last year, after a conservative organization filed a lawsuit alleging it was a free speech violation. In a 2-1 decision on Monday, the court ruled schools can indeed regulate speech that is likely to disrupt the educational experience, like intentional misgendering.
I really, really love about cases like this is when people sue for the right to be assholes. They sue for the right to be mean to other people. And specifically, in 9 out of 10 of these instances, it's to be intentionally mean to children. Like, what kind of absolute asshole do you have to be to go after children for no good reason?
Like, it blows my mind every time, Stephen. They're like not even holding their cards close to their chest. They're just like, hey, guess what? I'm gonna wave my asshole flag.
Yeah, that part. After an Italian boxer forfeited her match against her Algerian opponent at the Paris Olympics on Thursday, conservatives, anti-trans activists, and right-wing celebrities came out of the woodwork to condemn the Algerians' participation in the games, claiming without evidence that she was male and should not have been allowed in boxing. The loudest among them came from, of course, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, who denounced the new men's rights movement and repeatedly misgendered the Algerian boxer in a Twitter post accusing her of enjoying the distress of her competitor. Even though we all know at this point that neither boxer was a trans woman, the anti-trans contingent simply didn't care.
I'm just gonna say, like, transphobia hurts cis women too. And so this is just proof of that. And J.K. Rowling is being the ultimate asshole in not retracting, even though major news affiliates have retracted their claims.
And something that people aren't really paying attention to, that I have been paying attention to for some time, is the fact that this is an escalation of the ways in which cisgender women are being harmed. It started with children. It started with parents and grandparents being at Little League games, accusing little cisgender girls that may have a boyish haircut of being boys trying to play on girls' teams. And in high school, of political pundits and school district people accusing boyish looking girls on the basketball team for being boys playing on girls' teams. And now you have an Algerian boxer at the top of her game being accused of being a trans woman. It's getting to a point where, as you said, cisgender women are being harmed by this transphobia.
And major news publications have come out and apologized and retracted their comments around this boxer being trans. And J.K. Rowling hasn't. And so it's people that are committed to misinformation and dispersing misinformation, which is really dangerous and troublesome. All right, Stephen, we got to go to some other awful news. Have you heard about Ziklag, the ultra-conservative organization that is trying to purge voters in battleground states? Ziklag is investing heavily into something called Eagle AI, an artificial intelligence software that makes it easier to challenge the eligibility of voters in mass. 2 news outlets, ProPublica and Documented, obtained thousands of Ziklag's internal files and found the group has divided its 2024 activities into 3 different operations. Steeplechase, which uses churches to get out the vote; Watchtower, which aims to rally voters around opposition to transgender rights; and Checkmate, which is focused on funding so-called election integrity groups.
I really hope people are paying attention to the way these dots are being connected. Trump goes to a rally and tells a bunch of Christian nationalists that they will never have to worry about voting again after this election, that he's got it fixed. The fix is on, y'all. The fix is on. The fix is this AI software that is going to create a deluge of challenges to voters in these small precincts across the country that are going to create an absolute backlog. And what are they going to do? They're going to remove those voters from the rolls. People are going to show up at the polls to vote and find out that they've been eliminated. And it's just going to create a bigger problem, and it's going to create opportunities for Trump, when he loses, to challenge the results in all of these backwater towns. And another thing that people aren't paying attention to is that there are currently 70 MAGA crazies that are now election officials throughout the country, many in these battleground states. So all you need is a couple to not certify the election. And now you have, once again, people having some concerns about the integrity of our elections, not because there's actually something wrong with our elections, but because you've got these election deniers in positions to create and sow chaos. It's a problem.
It's a serious problem.
But we're not going to get into all the problems that we have because we've got a guest in the wing. So let's get to her.
Let's do this.
Sonia Murphy is a trial attorney with the United States Department of Justice in the National Court Section, part of the Civil Division's Commercial Litigation Branch, one of the most active litigation sections in the DOJ. Before joining the Department of Justice in 2018, Sonia worked at several international law firms and for the U.S. International Trade Commission as an attorney advisor to the then chairman. Sonia is a graduate of 2 HBCUs. She obtained her bachelor's degree from Spelman and her law degree from Howard. She currently serves on the board of directors of Fair Chance, an organization dedicated to capacity building nonprofits serving children in Washington, D.C. and Prince George's County, Maryland. She also serves on the board of directors of the Gender Cool Project, a youth-led movement that works to change misinformed opinions about transgender and non-binary young people. On top of all that, Sonia is the proud mother of 2 daughters and auntie to countless children, including her transgender nephew, of whom she has full custody. Everyone, please welcome Sonia Murphy to our show.
Welcome to the show, Sonia. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. 2 of my faves. I'm so happy to see you both.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in because Stephen's going to say, we can't kiki, is what he keeps telling me. Your career at the Department of Justice sounds incredibly impactful. How has your professional experience shaped your advocacy for transgender youth?
You know, that's a great question, and the one that I think about all the time. Advocacy is absolutely in my blood. I feel like I have always been an advocate, whether it was social justice issues, women in the profession. I'm a former president of the DC Women's Bar Association. Advocating for transgender youth just sort of flowed from the general advocacy that my family has always done, you know, as Black Americans from the very beginning. As far as I can remember, we have always been active in social justice issues, in peaceful protests, in speaking out for the things that we want to see, and anti-discrimination policies, et cetera. And so our advocacy as our family has grown and matured, and certainly as my nephew came to us and shared with us, invited us into his journey of being transgender, it's just expanded our advocacy even more.
Since you brought up Amir, can you share a little bit about your journey in taking full custody of your trans nephew and how that has influenced your perspective on parenting and advocacy?
Yeah, so I thank you for asking. I don't get a chance to talk about Amir's mom much. And so whenever I have an opportunity to do so, I'm super excited and thrilled. So yay, let's talk Corey. Corey and I were actually cousins who treated each other more like sisters. We grew up together. She lived in Georgia, I lived in Maryland, and our parents would swap for the summer and send me down to Georgia for a significant part of the summer, and she would come up to Maryland for a significant part of the summer. And when we weren't together, we were on the phone, cackling and kikiing and being besties as besties do. So Corey was diagnosed with breast cancer. Amir had not yet discovered that he was trans. And so we were in that kind of phase where it's like, I think Amir is a tomboy. That's kind of where we were. And as Corey's illness progressed, and it progressed quickly, she passed at 33. Amir was 8 at the time. And again, had not yet discovered that he was trans. He was just unclear. To me, he seemed confused. And so I bring that up because it's something that Corey and I never had an opportunity to talk about. We talked about so many things about the future, places we wanted to go, what we wanted to see for our kids, places we wanted them to see. But we had not talked about, well, what if, one of the kids approaches us and says X? Like, it's just not something that had ever come up. But we had also committed to one another that we would be there for each other's children no matter what. And so when she passed away and Amir ultimately came to me, I knew that she would want me to respond in the way that I would respond to any young person that came to me and opened up and shared and invited me in. And that is with love and with understanding. And that meant running to Google and trying to figure out what is going on and what do we do? And that's absolutely what I did. And so it was, as you all know, as parents, a long and interesting journey. Amir's now 18, so it's been a beautiful journey, but it was a lot of learning that had to take place there. And there was an added layer of what would Corey do? And the answer was always, she proceed in love. And so that's absolutely what I did.
Thank you for sharing that.
And Stephen has another question for me, but I want to ask you this because you brought up sharing the story about Amir and his gender journey, but what was it like navigating family? I mean, obviously, Corey was your cousin. You were having to probably discuss this and have parental consensus, right? With your parents and Corey's parents to make sure everybody was on board and going to be supportive. What was that like?
Yeah, so that was interesting. So when Corey first passed, she named myself and her aunt as guardians for Amir. And so we began a beautiful co-parenting journey. Amir's aunt, who he now kind of calls his grandmother because she's senior, was in Georgia and in the home. So we were able to keep some consistency there. Meanwhile, I was in Maryland, but I had the two other children. I have two daughters, one younger and one older than Amir. So ideally, we knew ultimately we wanted Amir to come to Maryland, but we wanted to take it along, progress it naturally. His aunt was also very supportive, but she's a senior. And so we talk all the time about the struggles our seniors have to really understand this. And what I will say that I absolutely love and adore about her is she was open and willing to learn, but she just didn't know what to do. And neither did I. I'll also note that she lived in Georgia. And so now we in retrospect, we know that, as I always say, God does all things well, because the journey we went on here in Maryland, we would not have been able to go on in Georgia. And so we know that things work together in the way that they should. But she and I began a beautiful journey of trying to understand one another and also understand Amir. And again, we progressed from maybe tomboy, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's some sort of gender fluidity, we would say. And then we're like, well, that's not quite it. And then it was Amir who said, no, I'm trans. Like, I am a boy. Everything about me is a boy. And it was like a light bulb. Oh, I get it. And I think, you guys, we've had this conversation as parents. I can admit, I remember he and I having a conversation and him saying to me that I misgendered him the most. Meaning we would be places and people would automatically mistake, at the time I felt like mistake Amir for male. And so they would say, here, sir, excuse me, sir, we're taking our order. What would you, ladies and gentlemen, what would you like? And I would always say, no, this is my niece. No, this is my niece. I was forever doing that. And when he was explaining to me, inviting me in, what he said was, when people make what you're describing as the mistake, I feel good. And when you correct it, I feel bad. And it was like, I'm the problem here. Like, you are more comfortable with what they're saying. You're more comfortable being a male. And I'm forcing you into this female box by continuing to correct. No, that's my niece. Every single person, I would do it. And so that conversation is what really led me to then dig deeper into the term transgender. Like, what does that mean? And everything I read said, every paragraph was like a light. Every resource I looked at, every description was just like, we finally found the thing. We found the answer. We found the term. And I've been searching for so long. Oh, it's some sort of fluidity. I don't know. It could be, gender nonconforming, which I don't even know if that was a term back then. But, we played around with all of these terms. And when we found transgender and when he described to me that I was the one making him feel bad by correcting people. It clicked. It just clicked.
I have to jump in because I'm listening to you talk and I'm seeing my past. I'm seeing my son Hobbs with me going out to public places and everybody like, oh, you have such handsome sons. Oh, you have such good sons. You have such well-mannered sons. And constantly I'm like, son and daughter, sons and daughter. And I was doing it over and over and over again. And then one day, and this is after he had invited us in and he had socially transitioned, and I was talking about writing the memoir that I'm trying to get done. And I was asking him if he remembered like what it was like when he was being air quotes misgendered, and I was correcting people. And he said, every time someone called me a boy, it felt like a light had turned on in a dark room. It felt like I was being seen. And I didn't feel bad when you corrected them, but I felt really good when they saw me the way I see myself. So it's just interesting how we as parents or caregivers don't really peep game as much as we think we do, and how we have to listen to our children. We have to listen to our children. So now I'm going to let Lisa ask the actual question that she was supposed to be asking you.
No, but that's helpful, right? Like, I know I'm not alone. And I've shared that story with other parents and they said to me, me too, me too, me too. But it just is so common amongst us.
So our next question is, the Gender Cool Project is obviously doing amazing work. How did you get involved with this organization and what role do you play in their efforts?
So another shout out to grandparents. We got involved in the Gender Cool Project because my parents saw the Gender Cool Project on the Today Show. Amir had done a tiny little bit of advocacy in that he'd been interviewed for a Washington Blade article here in DC about his transition. And he also had a pretty active TikTok page where he was being very transparent about his transition as well. And so my parents saw the Gender Cool Project on the Today Show and they were like, these kids are doing what Amir is doing. He should connect. And I randomly just sent an email to like a generic email address like info@gendercoolproject.com or something like that, and introduced myself, introduced our story and Amir, and said, listen, we're looking for a network more than other people to advocate with, which I grew to understand sort of that's what it was, a youth-led movement. But at the time, we were just looking for a network, right? A family, a tribe. We were in DC, Maryland area. We were getting services at the hospital in DC. We were in the middle of COVID. I knew not another parent, not a single parent who was going through what we were going through. And Amir knew not a single person. He met a couple people like on social media, but in terms of like real life human beings you can touch, we knew no one. And so we were really navigating the journey alone. And that random email to Gender Cool, I got a response and it just sort of kicked off and became our first tribe. And it was beautiful because Amir was, as I said, doing some light advocacy, but he didn't have the background in advocacy. He had no training. You know, with the Gender Cool Project, they do provide the kids with some training and some skills around effective advocacy and storytelling. And that was really helpful for him. So it was good to see him get in that environment and really bloom in his ability to share his story in an impactful way. And so the tail end of your question, I have joined the board of directors, which has been amazing for me because Amir, as I said, is now 18. And so he's phasing out of a lot of the youth-led kind of activities as he progresses to just live his life, which again was the goal. So I'm super happy about that. But it's an organization that is dear to me, and I wanted a way to still be involved and impact change. And so sitting on the board of directors has allowed me to do that, and I'm super excited.
Daniel was part of Gender Cool for a year and just loved getting to know Amir. And I think what's really interesting is in you explaining like how disconnected you are. We found a community within the first year. So a lot of like the trans elders, well, Daniel calls them mentors because he says elders is rude. But a lot of trans mentors, adults, will tell Daniel, you're like an elder. You're like 9 years in. You have community built. And Daniel's like, oh gosh, I haven't even thought about the fact that I have been immersed in community and that I don't feel isolated. And so not too long ago, he found this photo of him that he and my sister replicated. We were in Disneyland together again. And so my sister was like, we should replicate this picture. picture that we did when you were 4. And so they did, and Daniel posted both of them, and people from school saw it. And Daniel, I think, sometimes forgets that like not everyone knows that he's trans, but he's out. So it's like for him, it feels weird when people are like, I didn't know. And Daniel's like, I feel like I'm so visible all the time. Some classmates were like, wait, you're transgender? And Daniel was like, yeah. And they were like, I am too. And it was interesting to see them find him outside of community and say, well, I haven't met anyone else. Right. And Daniel kind of being that lifeline to community. And so I think what you are saying is so important, in that parents, caregivers need to connect their youth to other trans youth so that they can feel connected and part of a broader community. Thank you for bringing that up. And there was no question, Stephen. You can ask the next one.
Why, thank you, Lisette. So, Sonia, we are both friends with Ngozi, whose daughter, Andrea Yearwood, was famously the victim of a terrible effort in Connecticut to ban trans girls from sports in that state. You testified against a bill in Maryland that would have restricted transgender students' participation in sports. What was that experience like, and what advice would you give to other parents who want to advocate for their children in similar ways as what Ngozi had to do?
That was an amazing experience for me. And here's why. I would say, uniquely interested in politics more, I think, than like most of my neighbors and friends, right? And yet the day I went to testify, there were all sorts of bills being heard that I had not heard about or considered. And so I was really blown away by, one, the ease with which I could sign up and testify, go up to the Maryland legislature and make my voice known, and then the other bills that were being considered that I knew that my friends and neighbors just didn't know about. And so it was really, really good for me. And shout out to social media, I think I was scrolling Instagram, and I saw a post from Athlete Ally that listed states that had anti-trans sports bills being considered. And I thought, surely Maryland doesn't, but let me just click and confirm. And I clicked and there was a bill. No one had told me about it, right? So I just randomly came across it. It had the bill number. So I closed Instagram and went to Googled the bill, and saw it was up for hearing. And I literally just signed up to testify. It was so easy. And so I tell that story to remind people you can make your voice heard, and you should make your voice heard. And I know that we are all very excited right now about the presidential race, and super excited to throw our support behind Kamala Harris, and we should be. But don't forget the county council, the local school board, and certainly your state legislatures, because they're the ones that are making law that impacts you day to day, and you can lend your voice and say something. And so I thought it was really powerful for me to be able to say, I live here, this is the district I live in, and I have a child who will be impacted by this law, and this is how I feel about it. There were people speaking from all different parts of the country that had all of this purported scientific evidence that was wrong. But I thought it was impactful to hear from actual parents whose children were going to be impacted by this bill. And the bill ultimately did not pass, which was gratifying. But again, I was really surprised at that there's a lack of involvement by us as citizens in the legislative process, and there shouldn't be. We have a right to be heard. These are things that are going to impact us day to day, and we should use our voices to say something about it.
We live in a state that already has a sports ban, and so I'm so glad that you were able to kill the bill before it was able to get put in. But I agree with you. Like, I had a parent ask for support on what bills. Obviously, we are organized, like a little bit more organized in Arizona, in that we have major equality groups trying to do outreach to families and organize them and get them signed up. But one parent told me, Lizette, there's over 300 bills. How do I know what is what, right? And so we have multiple people, trans community members, that just go through, and that's a job in itself, to try to comb through 300 different bills that are being put in place, and which ones are good and which ones are bad, right? It's just awful. I was curious too, like, obviously we were all part of the Human Rights Campaign, Parents for Trans Equality National Council, and your involvement has been so inspiring. You bring in such a different voice in terms of like what being a loving caregiver is, and your own journey with Amir and your daughters. How do you believe organizations like HRC can better support families of transgender youth?
That's a good question. Well, one, kudos to these organizations, including HRC, because I feel like they are doing an amazing job. But the work you just described, like Arizona Equality, that kind of work, I think is also very crucial. Again, I mentioned I felt very isolated as a parent initially when we began this journey, and HRC felt very big to me. And so I used HRC's website as a resource, and I think I probably found a PTAC, the Parents for Trans Equality Council website, long before I became a member, and the information was very helpful, but I didn't feel like that there was a person I could reach out and touch. It just felt too big and overwhelming. So I think we could do a better job of trying to make ourselves more visible and more accessible. And I think we're doing some of that work now. There is a new newsletter that we've released that we're trying to get out to families, and it provides an opportunity for people to respond and connect with us directly. I think that's very important. The resources are good. There was a lot of information I read about, misgendering and just early terms when we first started the journey. I just didn't know any lingo, and HRC's website was perfect for that. But again, I didn't feel like I knew a person that I could call someone and say, Lizette, can you help me? Have you been through this, etc. It wasn't until I began to build a network that I felt like I had a tribe. And I think having a tribe is really important, even for parents, not just for our kiddos, but for us, it's really important. And I think HRC and some of the bigger organizations could do a better job.
You make a really valid point, because one of the things that I think plagues national organizations is that disconnect between their mission and the actual people being served. And oftentimes what we were seeing when we got to PTAC was there wasn't a lot of representation of people of color, and they actively worked to change that. And, the PTAC of today is very different from the PTAC I found in 2019. So I really thank you for sharing that. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, as a former president rather, of the Women's Bar Association of DC, what parallels do you see between your work there and your current advocacy efforts on behalf of trans youth?
Lots of parallels. As I mentioned, not just advocacy for women in the profession, but also social justice advocacy and advocacy for transgender rights. I keep saying lately, I've been saying it's all human rights, and that if we all sort of do the work in our little small pocket of the world, it all relates, if that makes sense. Like, to me, it's all about equality. It's all about love and inclusion. And so the better job we do, whether it be the Women's Bar Association in advocating for the advancement of women in the legal profession, which is a very specific mission, or whether it be PTAC in advocating for the equality of treatment for transgender individuals, together, right? When you put all of that together, it's about equality, equity for everyone, inclusion for everyone, and love. Like, love is the overriding theme to it all. Is just love thy neighbor as thyself. And so to me, it all parallels. It's no different. I say when I joined the government, I took on a brand new practice area. And I remember saying in my interview, I'm a litigator. You give me the topic and I'll litigate it. It might not be government contract, may not be my area of expertise. Criminal might not have been my area of expertise. Intellectual property may not be my area of expertise, but I do know how to litigate. And so it's a new specific topic to learn, but the skill set is still the same. And that's what I've applied across my life, professionally and personally. The skill set is still the same. It's still me using my gifts and talents and abilities, mostly in oral advocacy, whether that be storytelling, whether that be arguing before a legislature about what they should and should not do, etc., or in a courtroom. It's all oral advocacy with a commitment that at the end of the day, there's more inclusion than there was before I began.
I just have to jump in here and say this, because Dr. David Johns says it all the time, and I love it. It is a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, and it is, until all of us are free, none of us are free. That's exactly what I hear you saying when you talk about the connection between your advocacy for women in the legal profession in DC and your advocacy for trans people and their families just globally.
Absolutely. None of us are free until we all get free. So we might as well help one another.
The intersection of young people justice and the legal profession is a significant focus for you. Can you discuss some of the most rewarding moments you've experienced working at this intersection?
Oh, I love that question. One of my favorite events when I was president of Women's Bar Association, question. I did a mock trial for kids where we created this entire fact pattern and had young people come in and do a mock trial. And I just love to see young people advocate. They bring all of this energy. And of course, in that setting, we set aside things like the rules of evidence and, all these things that muddy up the water for us as real lawyers or as lawyers. And they were just able to put on like a mock trial, totally be themselves, argue so forcefully and convincingly for what their positions were. And more importantly, get an introduction to the legal system in a way that made it feel safe for them and feel like this is something I can be involved in. And so it excites me. One of the most exciting things for me is to see young people in a setting where they get to advocate for themselves or for an issue and get exposure and get to do that well, if that makes sense. So that was exciting. And it's one of my sort of prideful moments that represent that intersection.
I just loved mock trials in law school. It was one of the most fun things. And it's always these really polarizing issues. And so they would put you on the side that you absolutely didn't want to be on. And you had to find a way to come up with a compelling case. So I know that the kids absolutely love that.
They kill it. They do a great job. And I think it's so much easier for young people to see things not so black and white as we do as adults. We have an issue and we say, this is our issue and my side is the right side and this is what I believe. And mock trial forces you to identify your weaknesses. And I find that young people are really good at that. I think because they come at it with much less bias than we do.
Absolutely.
So I love that.
So you participated on a panel at the NLGJA 20. So you participated on a panel at the NLGJA 2022 National Convention discussing media coverage of transgender youth. In your opinion, how could the media improve its representations of trans youth and their stories?
Tell more positive stories. Representation matters, right? We say this all the time. And so I would love to see, and we've seen more, I will say, since 2022. So I'm very proud of some of the things we've seen more recently. But because representation matters so much, I would love to see more coverage of trans youth thriving, right? And this is what I love so much about the trans prom that your kiddos did and all of the coverage that came along with it, because every post or picture I saw from the trans prom had a smiling face in it. And when you contrast that with, some of the publications we know about and the articles that they like to print about trans youth, it paints a very dismal picture of children who are struggling with their identity and families who are having to flee from one place to the other. And I'm not negating that that's happening. And that's very much a significant and real part of some families' struggle as well. But for the kids you mentioned, Lizette, that came to Daniel and said, I'm trans and may not know anyone else, those are the ones that I think is so important that they be able to turn on the TV or open a magazine or a social media post and see a smiling, thriving person like Daniel or Hobbs from Trans Prom, right? Just being their true, authentic selves and being happy. And that part of the story doesn't get told enough. And that is what that panel, Amir and I did that panel together. And it was great fun. It was one of we don't always do things together. He and I are in very different spaces. And that was an opportunity for us to be together. And we really enjoyed it because we together are committed to working to see more positive representation where we can, particularly of minority families.
I think for Daniel, the most important thing that he wants other trans kids to know and trans youth to know is that, I think for him, the media coverage on policy, because obviously that's policy, you have to show harm, right? You have to have evidence of harm. And so the conversation becomes reductive to what will happen to trans youth without holding society accountable for those disparities, right? Mm-hmm. And so Daniel was very clear when the first conversation he had with around trans prom, he said, I'm tired of being told I'm going to die. I'm tired of being told that the life expectancy is 35. And that not have any context to it, right? It's not because I'm trans that these are my statistics. It's because I live in a violent and or biased society that's impacting me, right? And so since y'all shared a quote, can I share a quote? Daniel uses this quote in every single one of his presentations when he presents to people. It's by Bell Hooks. And I think it's at the core of what we're talking about, but it's silly, isn't it, that I would dream of someone else offering to me the acceptance and affirmation I was withholding from myself. This was a moment when the maxim, you can never love anybody if you are unable to love yourself, made clear sense. And I add, do not expect to receive the love from someone else you do not give to yourself. And I just feel like every time he reads that, I've done my job, right? Like
goosebumps.
Yes, you know, like they can love themselves into whole regardless of what society says. And so this goes back into like, I think what positive representation and self-love looks like, because I feel like Amir embodies that all the time. And his story was featured in the GLAAD Media Award winning ABC special, Our America, Who I'm Meant to Be. How has this exposure impacted your advocacy, Amir's advocacy, and your personal life?
It's been amazing. We won a GLAAD Media Award for the special, which was unexpected and a huge big deal for the kids. Amir had a great time at the GLAAD Media Awards. The award was presented by Don Lemon. Like it just couldn't be a better moment for him. And I think he, takes great pride in sharing his story and it being well received. And so I think that really gave him an added layer of confidence that, I can help people just by being myself and sharing my story. I don't need to perform any magic trick. All I have to do is show up as my true authentic self and be myself. And that makes me very, very proud. And so it was a great experience. I'm so glad we did it. I'm so glad he did it. And then I'm glad it's getting the recognition that it deserves. They mentioned during the announcement for the award that it came out during a time where people were talking a lot about trans youth and no one was talking to trans youth. And Gio Benitez, who is the journalist that conducted the interviews with the kids, did a real good job of just talking to them. And that I think was the hook and why it came across so well. And people really enjoyed watching it. The takeaway was these were just normal kids, right? These are, and we talk about that all the time. These are just normal kids. And I was thinking about what you said, Liz, that I laughed because Amir too, I think sometimes when people, somebody sees the Hulu special or something and says something to him like, oh my God, you're trans, I had no idea. He even forget, it is the least interesting thing about him. And it is one of the things he talks about the least. It's not something we talk about all the time at home. It's not something we're completely focused on all the time at home. So he's always like, oh, okay, yeah, that's surprising to you. Yeah, that's like a small part of my journey. But do you want to hear something greater? Like I just went to prom. Let me tell you what I wore. I graduated from high school. I'm so excited. I'm cutting hair. I'm going to barber school. Like for him, it's such a small slither of who he is and what his experience is. And I love that reaction always. I love to see it. And I like you, when I see him respond that way, I'm like, I've done my job. I've done my job because he loves himself. He is comfortable with who he is and takes pride in who he is. And the fact that he's trans is just one of the things, like one of several things about him. Being trans is not what he would think of first when you ask him to describe himself. It's just not. It won't come. It's not front of mind for him. And I love that for him.
One of the reasons that Lizette and I were so excited to have you on is because you just have this super fresh, positive perspective on life and on parenting trans and non-binary youth, and really just parenting members of the LGBTQ plus community. Because people don't know you got more than one member of the alphabet mafia in your family.
I do.
You're just raising them to be good human beings. There's nothing particularly exotic about it. So our final question to you is, what message would you like to share with other parents or guardians of, let's just say, gender expansive youth who are struggling to find their voice or their paths to advocacy? What advice would you give them?
I would encourage them to pause for a moment, to sit with themselves and consider the love they have for the young person in their life, whether it's their child, a niece, nephew, whoever that person is. Consider themselves, consider the love they have for that person. Ask themselves how they want the world to treat that person and conform themselves to be the world, because the people closest to you are are your world initially, right? So when you're talking about young people, if you are not, as Lizette said earlier, self-love, but if you're not getting loved and affirmed at home, you certainly cannot expect the world to love and affirm a child that you won't even love and affirm in your own space. And so I don't say that to be harsh. I just encourage parents, caregivers, etc. Sit with yourself. Think about the love you have for that young person and ask yourself, how do you want the world to treat them, and model that, because you are the world in the very first instance. Model that. And we all know the statistics. Every young LGBTQ plus person has a greater chance of thriving if they have an affirming adult in their life.
I love that. Be the world for your trans or non-binary youth.
So beautiful. Wait, Stephen, I want to tell you something because it made me really emotional when you ended. I don't know, I'm in my field today. Today was a hard day. Chewy's family was really hard. He's the youngest of 10. There's like 50 plus people, like cousins, spouses, like everybody felt like they had a say. And we didn't talk to them for 2 years. And some people kind of come into our lives, but it's never been the same, right? Like it's never really been the same. But one of the kindest things that one of Chewy's sisters ever said to me was, this was a few years after we were starting Daniel, and she told Chewy, our mom would be proud of Lizette. And I think like that was for me, like I was like, God, because she was a really religious woman, and I just thought she would be so pissed at us. Chewy said this one time to me, like he was like, I'm glad, he's like, I miss my mom every day, but if she were alive, she would have made this so much harder, because she was just so religious, you know? And two things can exist. I think he didn't mean it in a bad way. He was just like, this would have been hard to navigate, like my mom, and not to have her in my life. And so when his sister said that, I just was like, okay, because I've often thought like, did I draw this wedge between his family? Like that's such a big sacrifice that he's made for Daniel. When you were sharing that, I just think, God, Corey is taking care of y'all, and she must be so proud too.
And my mom too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that I am doing exactly what she would do. Not just for me. If something happened to me and she had my babies, she would do what I am doing. And that is use her voice for good and to make the world better and safer for them. And I'm just grateful.
I send you a big hug.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sonia. This episode is just so special. And Stephen and I know I shouldn't speak for Stephen, but I will, in that our cups get refilled when we get a chance to talk to other caregivers.
Absolutely. My cup floweth over. Sonia, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on today. I'm so happy you were able to join us and share these little pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We love you.
I love you guys. Enjoyed this. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals or groups that are supporting the LGBTQIA community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lizette, who are we talking about today?
I laugh every time you make me say this, but our ally of this week is Laura Ingraham. This week's very unlikely ally is being celebrated on this podcast because of an interview Ingraham gave with convicted felon and Republican twice impeached presidential nominee Donald Trump. In the now viral clip, Laura Ingraham asked Trump what were his pronouns, to which the confused ex-president stammered, I don't have pronouns. I don't want any pronouns. Ingraham then seemed to wonder whether the Republican presidential candidate's gender was fluid, asking, so are you fluid then? What is that?
I have to tell you, I cracked up. First, when I saw the headline about Trump being gender fluid. Second, when I read the article. And third, when I watched the video, because I was just like, this man is just so ill-equipped to be the president of anything, much less be given another chance to run this country. So I just love it. And like I said, I just laughed, and I will continue to laugh every time I watch it. I'm just going to keep it on rewind.
I'm going to put it on loop too. And this is why Laura Ingraham is our ally of the week.
Okay, congratulations to our unlikely ally, Laura Ingraham. Now on to our asshole of the week. Our asshole of the week is Logan Paul. Controversial YouTube influencer Logan Paul has admitted spreading misinformation about Olympics boxer Imane Khelif. In his now deleted Twitter post, Logan said, "This is the purest form of evil unfolding right before our eyes. A man was allowed to beat up a woman on a global stage, crushing her life's dream while fighting for her deceased father. This delusion must end." In his half-assed apology, Logan posted again, admitting that he might be guilty of spreading misinformation like like, duh.
Can we just cancel Logan Paul again? I mean, he's been canceled 5 times, if not more. So we need to just say goodbye to this awful influencer and quit using transphobia and being transphobic against all people, including women.
And this is why Logan Paul is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, Sonia Murphy, for joining us today. And of course, I gotta give it up to my bomb co-host, Lizette Trujillo, for always riding with me the way she does.
Oh, and I gotta thank you, Stephen. You know I couldn't do this without you. And we, of course, couldn't do this without all of you, our listeners. So thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast.
Goodbye.